Well, let me kick us off, folks, because I want to make sure that we've got the chance to make the best possible use of the folks and the expertise here. Raina, you're going to just keep welcoming people on in, if I'm right, as they join us. Okay, so folks, it's my absolute pleasure. You are in the right Zoom room. If what you've joined is a panel on building college to career pathways that support all students. And I'm delighted in this particular session to be joined by two fabulous individuals in this space. I want to welcome in Kerry McKittrick. Kerry is the Associate Director of the Project on the Workforce at Harvard. And the Project on the Workforce is an interdisciplinary collaborative project that's located between the Harvard Kennedy School's Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy, the Harvard Business School Managing the Future of Work project, and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Kerry brings a really rich and interesting history as a quantitative researcher with a particular interest on workforce initiatives and social mobility. And I'm going to let her kind of explain a little bit more about that in her own introduction. But I also want to welcome into this space Zack Mabel. Zack is a research professor of education and economics here at Georgetown University. He's off in our McCourt School, working on the Center on Education and the Workforce, where he leads research projects that leverage insights from labor and behavioral economics to promote educational opportunity, equity, and economic mobility. I'll just confess at the outset, I know why I'm here in this particular space, and it's because I invited Kerry and Zack to join us. I know the power and how important it is to be able to see research, to know what research is telling us, to be able to work from a point of real understanding about what researchers have learned, so that when we go to work on issues of equity with our students, with colleagues at our institutions and across institutions, that we do so in kind of the best informed manner. But I also know how hard it is for a lot of us to keep track and pace with the research that's coming out, to be able to understand the nuances of that research. And so it's always really important to me at the Summer Equity Institute that we have a session that's really a very heavy research-driven session that helps us understand the data that's out there and how we can make the best use of that data. So that's this session. And so we're going to actually see two presentations. Both Zack and Kerry have some presentations prepared for us because they're going to show us graphs and things like that. But they're also going to talk us through the research that they've done and why they've done it and how we can help see their research as practitioners. We're going to have time for some questions directed to each of them after their presentations, and then we're going to have a whole bunch of time at the end just for larger conversations. So I'm going to encourage folks as we go throughout this conversation to drop questions and comments into the chat, and we'll make sure that they all get elevated. Okay, well, I'm going to start though, Kerry, by welcoming you into the space and inviting you just to tell us a little bit more about us. You've got an impressive skill set that could have landed you at a lot of places doing a lot of different work, and this is the work you've chosen to do. So tell us more.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Heidi. I'm thrilled to be here. Why am I in this space? I've always cared about equity, economic opportunity, economic mobility, and my background's actually on the policy side. So I used to work on Capitol Hill and at Jobs for the Future. And the more I worked in this space, the more I saw the need for research, and research that was practitioner facing, that was action oriented. Too often, I think folks in these different sectors are speaking different languages and not talking to each other. And so I was really excited to work at a place that's kind of a hub for this research, but also this practice with amazing folks in the field like Zack and you. And also to be with students. So part of the Project on Workforce mission is to create as well the next generation of leaders in workforce and education issues. So being able to work with so many students is wonderful. As a student myself, I just appreciate the opportunity. And this this kind of new approach to bringing together both education researchers, labor market researchers across sectors together to really kind of collaborate and understand this problem better.
Kerry, thank you. And I'm the idea that this is a place where folks can come together and come together with all sorts of different skill sets, and that we learn to talk across those skill sets and with one another, I think is so important. It has a lot to do with also how we educate. You're right, the next generation of students who will join us in this work. Zack, you're a neighbor in a sense because you're one of my colleagues here at Georgetown. But we just met because I invited you to speak here. So tell us a little bit more about your journey, please.
Yeah, well, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is tremendous. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I guess just a little background about myself. I've been working to create more opportunities for upward economic mobility for close to 20 years now. I started out working in the nonprofit sector, creating workforce development and asset building initiatives in New York City, primarily for low-wage workers and their families. And it was really a combination of that work and some inspiring mentorship that I received while I was in graduate school that I really came to appreciate, the power and the potential for higher education in particular to be a gateway to economic opportunity, especially given the way that our society is structured and the very close connection between economic opportunity and education, higher education in the US. And so I've really devoted, the past decade and a half to conducting research and then advocating for evidence-based policies and interventions based on that research that really show the greatest, potential for increasing access to educational and economic opportunity in our country. So it maybe is no surprise that sort of given my background that I've, eventually found myself here at CEW, the Center on Education and the Workforce. So at CEW, we're a research and policy institute. We're located within the McCourt School of Public Policy here at Georgetown. And our mission is really to develop, really useful research and tools. So we're not, looking to just do a bunch of work that lands in academic journals, although we, very much respect that work as well. But we really want to be part of the conversation with the public, with college leaders, with policymakers on figuring out ways to better align education and training in the labor market. And so, just to give you a flavor of some of the work that we do, we study the labor market value of 2-year and 4-year degrees, how that varies across institutions and different programs of study. We examine, the education requirements that are projected, that will be projected in the future, and how those vary across occupations and industries in parts of the country. And then we also study, and this is very relevant to, I think, our conversation this afternoon, we study how educational and economic opportunity varies systematically by race, class, and gender. And then we derive policy recommendations based on that research to help foster a more equitable and inclusive society. So that's a little sort of background, I guess, on what brings me here as well. Heidi, do you want me to just jump right into talking a little bit in detail about our new research?
Say really quickly here. So for folks who don't know, there's a couple of places that I know to follow to look for really interesting research and data coming out. Center for Education and the Workforce here at Georgetown is one of those places. So when this report popped out, the one I just dropped the link into in the chat back on May 1st, I think I got it on May 1st, like at the moment that it revealed through some email. I encourage folks to follow and take a look at it. But this isn't the only piece of work that Zack will be describing, but I think this forms the core of it. This is the What Works 10 Education Training and Work-Based Pathway Changes that Lead to Good Jobs. So Zack, this one's all yours now. Thank you.
Great. All right, let's try to share a screen here. All right, can everyone see this? I'm gonna assume that's yes. Okay, perfect. All right,
that's
so
great,
that's
Zack.
exactly right, Heidi. So I'm going to spend most of my time over the next few minutes just talking about this research, giving a high-level overview. The title of the report is What Works? So 10 education, training, and work-based pathway changes that lead to good jobs. So in this work, we were really interested in determining how much young adults' likelihood of being in a good job could be improved by specific changes in their trajectory at critical junctures from adolescence, during high school through their mid-20s. So, for example, let's take an individual who entered a bachelor's degree program but is not on track to actually complete their degree by their mid-20s. What would happen if instead there was, a set of interventions that kept them on track and helped them actually complete their degree by their mid-20s? How would that actually affect their likelihood of working in a good job at age 30? Now, just before we sort of get too far ahead of ourselves here, what do we mean by a good job? So job quality obviously has multiple dimensions, including, how much you earn, your fringe benefits, your work-life balance. So what we mean by a good job, in order to make this very measurable and tractable in our work at CEW, we define a good job as one that pays a minimum of $38,000 a year for workers who are younger than 45. But in practice, folks who are in a good job at age 30 tend to earn a lot more. So the median earnings for those individuals in a good job is around $57,000. And having a good job is also, very tightly linked to having access to a retirement account and employer provided health insurance, and on all of the other ways in which you might think more holistically of defining a good job. So one thing we know, as I alluded to a little bit in my introduction, is that post-secondary education and training has become increasingly important to securing a good job in early adulthood. So what this figure here is showing is it's showing the share of workers who are in a good job at each education level among two cohorts of individuals. So baby boomers who were born between 1946 and 1950, that's the blue line, and millennials, those who were born between 1981 and 1985, and that's the orange line. And one thing that maybe pops out as you look across each of these panels is that it's only the millennials who have a BA or higher who have a higher likelihood of working in a good job at age 30 than baby boomers with the same level of education. At all other education levels, it's taking young adults longer than it did in the past to work in a good job. And many young adults are encountering more obstacles along the pathway from youth to adulthood in today's world that lowers their chances of achieving economic security. So using data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, what we did in this new research that we conducted was we developed a policy simulation tool called the Pathways to Career Policy Simulation Model, in which we examine how changes to an individual's pathway actually influences their likelihood of achieving economic security in early adulthood. And so we use the model to really ask three questions. The first is, which pathway changes are most likely to improve the chances that someone finds themselves in a good job? So that's sort of at an individual level. And then the second question is, if you take those individual benefits and you scale them up to everyone who sort of meets the criteria to potentially benefiting from one of these pathway changes, what would the societal impact of that be? How many more young adults could find themselves in a good job as a result of that pathway change? And then the third question we asked is, what would the equity implications of that sort of scaling look like? So not just, if we don't just care about getting more young adults into good jobs, but we also care about creating a more inclusive economy, would these types of scaling practices narrow or widen the gaps that we see by race, class, and gender today? So some of the most effective pathway changes in terms of improving an individual's likelihood of being in a good job include workforce-oriented strategies. Those include, for example, concentrating in career and technical education in high school, and also avoiding gaps in employment as a young adult. But many, going back to sort of where I started in this presentation, in the very tight connection between economic opportunity and higher education, it's not surprising that what comes out of this Pathways to Career model is that many of the most effective pathway changes involve expanding college access, and increasing college success. So just to give you sort of a taste of what this looks like, one of these pathway changes that we examine is looking at individuals, so high school graduates, who are not planning on pursuing any post-secondary education or training between the ages of 18 and 22. And so for those individuals, there's 4.7 million of those individuals in the current cohort of 18 to 22-year-olds. They have a 23% chance of having a good job at age 30. If you instead took those individuals and enrolled them in a certificate or associate's degree program by age 22, their likelihood of working in a good job at age 30 increases by 6 percentage points. And if in addition to just putting them on that pathway, you ensured that they actually earned a college credential, their likelihood of having a good job increases by 11 percentage points to 34%. Now, if you took all those 4.7 million individuals and you put them on that middle skills pathway instead of just having no more than a high school diploma and going immediately into the workforce, you could potentially increase the number of young adults working in a good job by a little over 500,000 individuals. Another example is focusing on young adults who are academically qualified to enter a 4-year degree program, but choose not to do so. And so those individuals, some of them are going to go into certificate or associate's degree programs, but many of them are going to forego college altogether. So there's 4.8 million individuals that we estimate who could potentially enter the bachelor's degree program by the time they're 22 that are currently not doing so. And again, we see that if you put those people on the bachelor's degree pathway, their likelihood of having a good job increases by 16 percentage points. And if you ensure that they earn a bachelor's degree by age 26, their likelihood increases by 25 percentage points, almost double what their baseline likelihood of having a good job is, which is 33%. And again, if you scale that to all the young adults who potentially could benefit from this pathway change, you're talking about potentially increasing the number of young adults who are working in good jobs at age 30 by over 1 million individuals. So, what these findings really underscore is the importance of expanding college access and success to make these pathway changes possible. The good news is that there are several model programs and interventions that really show how these pathway changes can be actualized. There's certainly a need for more outreach and advising from colleges to high schools, and creating closer connections between college and high school to demystify the college experience for students who aren't familiar with it. And so that's where programs like dual enrollment and the early college high school model, which I think hope some of you may have learned more about in a session yesterday. Those are great model examples of actual programs in practice to create these closer bridges between secondary and post-secondary education. Affordability, we know, is a huge obstacle to enrollment and persistence. And in particular, we know that providing more generous need-based financial aid, so aid that's targeted to those who are otherwise going to have challenges paying for college out of pocket, has very large impacts on enrollment and persistence. But there's also significant room and really strong evidence that's come out that it's not just about providing more dollars to students, but it's also about making financial aid much more understandable and predictable for students. And so that's why programs like the Hale Scholarship at the University of Michigan, which doesn't actually increase financial aid at all for the students who benefit from the scholarship, all it really does is tell students exactly how much aid they would receive if they attended the University of Michigan, and it tells those students that before they even apply. That has a huge impact on increasing the number of low-income students who apply to the institution and the number who enroll. And so there's a whole host of reform efforts, I think, that could be done around making financial aid less opaque and easier for folks to understand exactly how much it would cost them to attend college, so that they're making decisions based on, you know, more informed information than what they think it's going to cost them, which oftentimes can be quite dramatically different from what they would actually have to pay. Of course, we know that, you know, students who are at risk of not graduating stand to benefit from interventions that extend beyond financial aid and even academic support. And so that's why we see, you know, wraparound support programs like CUNY ASAP and the Dell Scholars Program at four-year institutions, which, you know, are really providing a set of holistic strategies that are addressing the multi-dimensional obstacles that students experience to staying enrolled, have demonstrated tremendous success as well. And lastly, you know, for many students, the college-going journey is not linear. And oftentimes students are going to attend more than one institution over the course of their college-going experience. And so we really need to be developing policies and programs that meet students where they're at and that create stronger bridges and pathways between institutions. Obviously, this is, you know, a huge focus about improving vertical transfers from two-year to four-year institutions. But we also, you know, need to do a better job of supporting horizontal transfers for students who, you know, just the fit isn't right at the first institution that they attended, as well as students who find themselves at four-year institutions, aren't necessarily going to pick up a bachelor's degree, but you know, our research shows that they really stand to benefit from having some sort of college credential that rewards them for the investments that they've already made in their college-going experience. And so reverse transfer and degree reclamation policies are also, I think, part of a holistic solution that we need to be thinking of in order to be expanding college opportunity to students. Excuse me. So there are several, you know, proven strategies for supporting young adults to make successful college-based pathway changes. One of the other things that we found in our work is that scaling up many of these pathway changes without attention to equity would in fact widen economic inequality. And so here what we're showing is that if all you did was take all of the young adults who were eligible to either enter the middle skills pathway or to enter a bachelor's degree pathway who were otherwise not going to do so, you would in fact see that the white-black gap in the likelihood of having a good job would increase slightly, as would the gender gap in the likelihood of having a good job. The socioeconomic based gap in having a good job would decrease, but only by a little bit, right? And so when we are thinking about not just, you know, maximizing the number of individuals in a good job, but we also want to create a more equitable society, what these findings really reinforce is that we need to embrace affirmative action, not turn away from it, as, you know, we unfortunately are sort of bracing ourselves for with the upcoming Supreme Court decision. We also need to extend the set of policy solutions beyond education, training, and the workforce, because the reality is that many other factors beyond those also influence the likelihood of having a good job. And so ultimately, to create a stronger and more inclusive economy, we really need to invest in a holistic all-one system approach that breaks down silos across organizations and across policy domains. So I'll just wrap up. Hopefully I can make it through without choking. But I'll wrap up with three takeaways that I hope are actionable for you all in the work that you're doing, and I know the projects that you're sort of focusing on over the next few days. The first is to ask yourselves, how can you contribute to silo busting? So how can your institution create new and deeper partnerships with other organizations? Second, simplify, 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 by which I mean, how can the college going experience on your campus be streamlined so that students aren't thrown off track because of avoidable administrative barriers? And third, when you're designing new policies, programs, and interventions, think about taking an opt-out approach rather than an opt-in approach with students, because many students who stand to benefit the most from intervention are often the least likely to seek out help on their own. And so oftentimes we need to be intrusive rather than simply providing resources, making them available, but not requiring students to take advantage of them. And so Heidi, I know already posted a link to our report. Here it is again, if you want to learn more about the findings in our latest research. And also if anyone has any follow-up questions for me directly, don't hesitate to email me, and there's my contact information. Thanks.
Zach, thank you so much. Also not the least of which is for staggering through just
Yes, my apologies.
Are there questions from folks in the audience? I want to give people a moment here because I want to make sure that we have conversation time at the end for both Kerry and Zach together. But are there specific questions for Zach right now? Let me just take a quick pause for this. And I have endless questions, but I'm often not going to be selfish in this space. So. Zach, let me kick one off, and this will give other people time to think here. But Paul LeBlanc talked with us in our provocation earlier today, and one of the things that he said, one of the statistics that he quoted resonated a lot with what you described. So he said that on average, students lose 43% of their credits when they transfer from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. That's clearly not true in all systems, and we have programs at statewide levels, right? 2+2 programs that are really powerful. But I know also that there's a lot of schools who are represented here, schools who are often part of the American Talent Initiative, which is helping to sponsor us, where one of the signatures of being a selective institution is being selective in the transfer credits that you accept. And I guess my question is, do we have data, the CEW have data, for example, about outcomes for students in states, for example, where you can just transfer lock, stock, and barrel your credits, like where they have formal 2+2 arrangements, versus systems where students lose so many credits and end up having to kind of retake things? I mean, is there a benefit for those students in the long run to have lost 43% of the credits? Or is that just selfishness on the part of the 4-year institutions?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would definitely say that, I mean, ultimately what the research shows us is that when students are transferring and they need to, and they lose a lot of the credit for the work that they've already completed, what you're essentially doing is extending their time to a degree. And which means that for many of those students, it's taking out more loans and more foregone earnings that they have to give up because they don't yet have their credential and aren't going to be able to take advantage of the economic returns that credential is going to confer. So, yes, I think one of the sort of from a policy perspective, one of the things that we as a system need to push back against is the desire to maintain prestige at the cost of preventing people from, having the greatest economic opportunities that are available to them. So there's the costs in terms of those who, it's going to take you longer. And so that's going to eat into what your returns are going to be. There's also in the additional cost, which is when we make it really, really complicated to transfer, not only are people going to lose credits, but a whole bunch of people who potentially would have been able to successfully make the transition from a 2-year to a 4-year institution aren't actually going to be successful as a result of it. And so there's all of those young adults who potentially would benefit from this pathway change of, getting onto the bachelor's degree pathway, that the challenges and the complications around making that successful transfer are going to close out a whole lot of economic opportunity that they would otherwise have. And so there, in economics, we talk about that as sort of, there are costs on the extensive margin, those who would have transferred successfully but now don't, and then there's also costs on the intensive margin. Even among people who do successfully transfer, you're going to be prolonging how long it takes them to finish, which has its own costs. And so, I don't, from my own read of the literature, I don't see any benefits to the complicated process that we generally have for students to make transfers from community colleges to four-year institutions today.
Zack, thank you. I feel like it's a question about whether institutions want to be elite about who they admit or about who we graduate. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
where do we set the bar high?
Right, and I think, one of the things that's the one way in which this sort of ties into the whole conversation around, affirmative action and what's next as a result of whatever the Supreme Court decides, is how do you find your diversity on campus now, if in fact admissions offices can't consider race explicitly? And one of the solutions that a lot of people are talking about is to actually open up more transfer pathways from community colleges to selective institutions, because of obviously the different demographic student populations at those institutions. And so, this could be a 2-for. It's not only good from the individual's standpoint of gaining access to that selective institution, but it also could meet the diversity objectives of the institution when they are going to have a more challenging time doing so as a result of these upcoming changes potentially.
Zack, thank you. For folks who are interested in around the Supreme Court decision and the legal perspective on it, you're missing that session by being here right now, but don't you worry, we got you because it's all being recorded. But we have two legal scholars, one from University of Idaho in the Penn State legal system, and one from Georgetown University, talking about the legal ramifications of that impending decision. But for now, we're going to move from Zack's perspective on the importance of going to and getting through college to turn our attention to Kerry and the work coming out of her work at Harvard that's looking at which equity initiatives provide the smoothest transitions for college students into the workforce. So Kerry, welcome aboard, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Heidi. And I'm shocked I didn't just lose like 10 or 15 people from that. But I'll do my best to make this interesting as well. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen here. Great. Well, I am going to talk about recent research that we put out at the Project on Workforce called the College to Jobs Initiative, where we examined the connection, or rather the disconnect, between the college system and college graduates and the labor market and available jobs. I'll start with a bit of background. I'm going to talk about two research projects in particular that came out of this initiative, the College to Jobs Playbook, as well as a map that we created, a data tool. But I'll try to be brief so we can have some time for discussion. So you heard a bit of an overview about who we are at the Project on Workforce. So I'll kind of run through this, but I do just want to call out some of our faculty advisors who led this report as well, specifically David Deming and Joe Fuller, as well as our other leads, Peter Blair and Rafaela Sajun, who are doing really interesting work This is a bit about some of the initiatives we have. Our mission generally is to create more and better pathways to good jobs, to smooth the transitions between education and work, and to make data more accessible and usable. So what we call data for the public good. Happy to connect on any of these and afterwards. So why did we focus on college to jobs? And I think Zack set this up perfectly. But we know that, you know, the more education you have, the more advanced degrees you have, the more money you make. And this gap has been widening over the past 50 years. But of course, as you know, most of us know, folks are starting to question the value of college. And, you know, they're starting to say, well, maybe this isn't worth my time. And so we wanted to investigate how and whether colleges, you know, how they can and how they are delivering on that economic mobility promise. And of course, this is also a regional economic problem, because we know that when businesses want to go to a region, or when they think about where they're going to set up shop, workforce skills and human capital development systems are a huge part of that. So in addition to looking at specifically kind of the individual level and how to promote individual economic mobility, we're considering regional level as well. So the College to Jobs initiative is a research and practice project with a focus on broad access institutions, as well as MSIs and HBCUs. And I'm going to talk about two of the applied research projects, as I mentioned, but we also have some innovation pilots, as well as convenings. We're trying to bring folks together to really draw attention to the role of college in promoting access to good jobs. So the College to Jobs Playbook is the white paper I mentioned, and we sought to answer kind of one question. And it sounds kind of simple, but it's not, as you all know. What can the college ecosystem do to promote economic opportunity and to launch students onto successful career paths? So we identified 13 interventions in the college ecosystem. We reviewed over 500 pieces of literature, whether it's journal articles or books, reports, the like, to kind of figure out and build a sort of taxonomy of interventions or programs and policies in the college ecosystem that are designed to smooth transitions from college to work. And so we kind of have these three buckets. We have exploration, skill building, and immersion. And happy to discuss any of them, but don't want to go into too much detail. But what we did was look at both the research and the practice for each intervention to create almost a menu of actions that stakeholders can take if they want to improve career outcomes for students. So we created this matrix that you can see here on the screen. And for each intervention, we looked at how prevalent is the research. So, you know, what is the body of research here? How much have people been looking at this? And we found broadly that kind of, which shouldn't be a surprise, a lot of the longer established structured initiatives have larger bodies of research. So, you know, experiential learning and internships and apprenticeships, you can see have prevalent research, whereas some of the newer interventions like last mile boot camps and some of the smaller interventions have less research. They may be harder to study or less isolated in their own program. We also looked at the evidence behind each intervention, and specifically the causal evidence that it connects, that the intervention leads to economic outcomes, specifically earnings and employment. So while many of these interventions, as we call them, have been studied in their impacts on educational outcomes, whether it's retention or completion or certification, many of them have not been studied from an economic side, because frankly, we don't have a lot of that longitudinal data, and the silos that have existed in practice exist in research as well. So again, we know that, some of these initiatives that are more embedded in the workforce, like apprenticeships and internships, have a stronger evidence base behind them, whereas some of these lower touch kind of, less structured initiatives have less evidence behind them. We also looked at the prevalence in practice. And found that the interventions that are siloed, either for one stakeholder in the ecosystem or within a college, as well as the unstructured or kind of free market, lack of a better word, interventions tend to be more prevalent. So career coaching often happens within a career office, doesn't require a ton of institutional restructuring or culture change. And internships, oftentimes students find them on their own. They're not really embedded in the college experience. But the key thing to note here is many of these are inequitable. So we're not saying, that having the prevalence of internships right now is an equitable solution, because many of them are unpaid and many of them lack wraparound supports, and many actually widen gaps. So when we think about designing these programs, we need to keep equity in mind. And the last thing we looked at was the feasibility for each intervention. And specifically, we looked at kind of the cost of developing the intervention and operating it, as well as kind of the operational complexity. So how many stakeholders were involved? Do they require kind of collaboration between employers and colleges? Do they require culture change across an institution and faculty requirements and trained staff? And so some of these are much more difficult. Looking at co-ops are incredibly difficult because they're so integrated between both the academic side and the career side. While some of the kind of easier to implement interventions like career readiness curriculum, for example, might more cleanly fit into existing structures and curricula. So a few key findings I just want to call out from our literature review. The ecosystem is, and many of these won't be surprise to all of you, I think. The ecosystem is poorly aligned, and this on the research side as well as the practice side. So it's difficult for employers to collaborate with colleges, to collaborate with policymakers. And the accountability is pretty limited around what the economic outcomes are for students. And so we need more transparency. But on the research side, we also don't have the data, and we don't have these long studies that are connecting career coaching in college, for example, to economic outcomes 5-10 years later. And we need to know these things, we believe. College to jobs interventions tend to be siloed within colleges. So oftentimes there's one career office, and they're, kind of responsible for all of these career connected learning opportunities. Whereas it can be more effective if experiential learning is part of every single course, for example, or faculty potentially are trained to be advisors, which we know the Lorraine College folks have done. We also know that combining interventions makes them more successful and effective. And I think Zack touched on this a bit. When we look at the CUNY ASAP program, we look at some of the work that Bunker Hill Community College is doing. When you combine cohort programs with advising, with work-based learning and mentoring, you have much higher success rates. But again, these are expensive and these can be difficult to operate, but they can be absolutely worth it. And then the last thing, which I mentioned briefly, is that, most of the time these interventions are offered inequitably. And, in particular, this idea of kind of unpaid or optional opportunities, career readiness courses that are not for credit are not going to be helpful to students who have limited time. Internships that aren't paid are not going to be accessible to folks who need to spend their time earning money. So thinking about equity is going to be key. And I'll close with a few recommendations. And these are specifically the recommendations for colleges. We by no means in this report think colleges are the sole, responsible stakeholder. And we have recommendations for employers and policymakers as well. This is an ecosystem responsibility. But given today's audience, I thought I'd touch on these. The first is putting economic mobility at the center of the mission. And, I think many colleges do this well. Other colleges, frankly, make this less of a central piece. And so integrating experiential learning, holding departments and faculty and courses to the requirement that they map to skills. Georgia State gave some stipends to faculty members that mapped their courses to skills. Combining advising. So Bunker Hill, for example, has student success coaches that combine academic, career, financial advising to make these difficult pathways really much easier to navigate. We recommend institutionalizing engagement. So creating a go-to place. Pima Community College has kind of a hub that folks know to go to, employers know to go to if they want to engage with folks in the college. And then having leadership at the leadership level of the college participating in workforce investment boards and regional economic entities can also help align with the local economy and available jobs. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the equity piece is crucial. Paid, for credit, flexible initiatives that are include wraparound supports as well are crucial. Okay, Heidi, how am I doing on time? Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to switch gears. So I'm going to talk now about the College to Jobs map, which is the second piece of this research project that I want to touch on. We created a data tool, and hopefully it will be useful to all of you. I encourage you to check it out. That's essentially a hub for information from education and employment at a regional level. So you can go into this tool, you can look at your region, you can find institutional information, you can find demographic information about college graduates. And then we map college graduate growth from 2014 to 2019, specifically at the degree level, to employment growth in that same region, and create a mismatch score so you can see how aligned employment and education are in your region. And we don't think this is the answer. There's a lot of challenges with the data, but we hope that this can kind of kickstart some conversations among stakeholders, like I referred to earlier, about a better aligning education and labor markets. So this is the data we use. And from the education side, we pulled together college scorecard and IPEDS data. We use the National Center for Education Statistics crosswalk to map field of study to occupation. And then we use ACS, BLS data to look at occupation and wage, as well as we have data from Lightcast on job postings in areas. The Opportunity Insights data tells us the economic mobility score for an institution. That's another effort that's going on at Harvard, Raj Chetty's work. And then we do some forecast modeling as well to project the data. Okay, so I'm going to play a video of the demo because I don't trust myself to not screw it up, but it's a quick 3-minute video. Hopefully it helps so that you all, I would hope, can use this as well.
The College to Jobs map visualizes data on colleges, economic mobility, graduation, and employment rates, as well as job postings data from our friends at Lightcast, allowing users to explore how local worker trends align with college graduate growth in regions around the U.S. from 2014 to 2019. We've divided the site into 2 separate maps, one focused on college graduate data, the other labor market data. Starting with the graduate map, each of the dots represents a college, color-coded by the economic mobility rate. If you're unsure about a term on the site, you can always hover over the info icon to get a definition, or click on our guide in the bottom left to learn more about the data. The underlying map is divided into geographic regions where people live and work, and the colors represent the growth among college graduates. This high-level map shows which regions across the country have the highest rates of graduate growth, where students have the training to work in the selected occupations and have attended the selected institution types. Let's say we're interested in Dover, Delaware. We can see graduate data, college data, graduate demographics, and even some trends. You can also use the filters on the left side. Here we'll zoom in on the graduates with the training to work in computer and math occupations who come from underrepresented groups. Let's take a look at the labor market map. Here, the map regions are color-coded based on what we're calling a mismatch score, which measures how worker growth compares to graduate growth across the country. Let's take a look at Laredo, Texas, a region with fairly balanced graduate and worker growth. We can also see that job postings have shot up by nearly 50%, and we thank our friends at Lightcast for providing this data to us. Here we bring together graduate and worker data, year-over-year trends, occupation data, worker demographics, as well as a forecast. Let's filter here for healthcare occupations and see the difference that makes. And before you go, be sure to check out the Explore Stories tab for specific use cases and interesting findings from the data.
All right. That is it from me. Thank you.
Kerry, thank you very much. Marina, let's get Zack pinned back again. Two of you were brilliant, and also now we have enough time for questions. Yeah, by this point, everybody knows. I mean, I'm a researcher, so I'm a data nerd, so this is fabulous. I think, let me start off with one kind of maybe softball question. We'll give folks in the audience time to do it up. Kerry, I'll ask this of you first. What piece of data really surprised you the most? We've talked already a couple of times, you know, I'm in love with your matrix. I recognize a lot of Georgetown initiatives in that matrix. I recognize a lot of advice we give students in that matrix. And there were places where I found myself nodding along and places where I was like, that can't possibly be true. That's got to be the wrong color symbol in that matrix. Yeah, what was surprising to all of you from what you found?
I mean, I have to say, and maybe I was a little optimistic going in, I was surprised that interventions that have career in the name don't have great economic outcomes data down the line. And, you know, this doesn't mean that the outcomes aren't there. The data just doesn't exist, or that in our literature review, we couldn't find it. So, you know, an intervention like career mentoring is something that, you know, we've seen positive effects, but on the economic side, career mentoring in college, there have been very few studies on that. So I would say, you know, some of that kind of reinforced my own experience around, I would say, the data silos, the research silos between education and labor market research. But on the other hand, was a little discouraging to see the lack there.
Or research that really stood out?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was quite surprising was the extent to which the impacts of these pathway changes that we simulated vary across different groups, and that was consistently the case by race, by gender, and by class. So, you know, I think maybe the most stark example was one of the pathway changes we looked at was a workforce-oriented one, where we took individuals who had no more than a high school diploma and were working at the beginning of their career in low-wage jobs, and we asked the question, what if instead of working in a low-wage occupation, you know, like food services, for example, what if you provided that person with some sectoral training and put them in a blue-collar job? And what we found was that was quite beneficial for men, and it was harmful for women. And so, you know, one of the, and we didn't go in expecting, you know, we sort of expected that well, maybe the magnitudes of some of these things might vary across groups, but not that the direction of a pathway change could be actually opposite for, for men versus for women. And in a couple of cases, and this blue collar pathway change is one of them, it actually it was a completely different story of, if you tried to scale this up for, all men versus for all women. And it really, I think, shines a light on how thoughtful and nuanced we need to be when we're designing these types of interventions in order to actualize these types of pathway changes. I think we always have to ask the question, for whom, and what is the expected benefit going to be, and how would it potentially differ across different backgrounds of individuals. And so I think that's a very, very big takeaway that we had, that, there's not a one size fits all approach to trying to, provide the most opportunities to individuals. What those look like are going to really differ, and you need to tailor it to who those people are and what their outside option is. So for women, the reality is that even if they're in a low wage job to start, many of those women find opportunities to advance, and they have more opportunities to advance out of those occupations than if you put them into a blue collar job. And the opposite is true for men, that there's more opportunities for upward mobility coming, being in a blue collar occupation than being in a low wage one. And so really sort of understanding those dynamics at play and how they vary across different groups of people, I think is really, really important.
Both of you have talked multiple times about kind of the importance of the nuance in reading these measures and understanding, and both of you also went into some detail describing kind of where the data comes from in your studies, right? And it struck me because the session that I was hosting yesterday, we had a conversation between two individuals who are working at the statewide level to think about how it is that we advance this work, particularly in today's social and political climate. So Harrison Keller, the Commissioner of Higher Education for the state of Texas, joined us. Lenore Rodicchio, who for many years had been provost at Miami-Dade Community College and now works with the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program and more at the state level as well. We're talking about this importance of linking kind of college education to careers, and that was universal language. It didn't matter what side of the political spectrum you were on, and But in your conversation earlier, Zach, in your closing remarks from your presentation, you also talked about the importance, things like affirmative action, right? In being able to think really precisely about demographics of populations. And so I'm struck by kind of the agreement between the messages that I'm hearing about this importance of focusing on the college to careers pipeline, the importance of focusing on data. And I think Lenore and Harrison would agree as well, that the focus on data doesn't get you out of thinking about disaggregated data and the importance of individual populations. It just gives you a different way of framing that argument. I think often when we talk about data, it sounds like, oh, we've got the solution. And that's not at all what either of your data sets are proposing for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the nice connections between our work is that I think in many ways we're using data in both of these cases as diagnostic tools, not as really trying to offer the solution. So, we're basically sort of saying, what does the data tell us about where opportunities exist and for whom? And then it really is about how do you craft a solution that is going to, work within the culture of your particular organization or institution and the particular, subset of students that you're really trying to reach, where that's really where a lot of the nuance comes in. But it's also, I think, the reality that what is going to make or break a successful program is oftentimes going to be reliant, it's going to hinge on those nuances. That's one of the hardest nuts for research to crack, of how do you take what is a model successful program in one context and apply it somewhere else or try to scale it up across multiple different sites. And we've seen time and time again across, several research studies that those efforts oftentimes, wouldn't say fail, but I would say face extreme challenges in trying to replicate what, was a successful pilot intervention. And it's because the devil's in the details. And it really requires, I think, every entity that is trying to develop one of these interventions to embrace it as their own and to make it their own in order to give it, the best chance that it has of being successful and reaching the most students who stand to benefit.
Yeah, Heidi, if I can jump in, I mean, what Zack is saying resonates. I think scale is really difficult. The regional economy also matters, right? Because if there are no internships to be had, if there are no good jobs in the area, then you have a very different situation than if you're in an economy with a lot of great jobs. Outcomes are going to be very different. And so one of the reasons we like to kind of think about the regional economy side in addition to the college side is that they are so entwined. And as Zack was saying, folks need to collaborate. I mean, I would say that so scale, it's much easier to do a smaller program than it is to, you have a college with 45,000 students, how are you going to scale up internships for every single student? That's a very difficult thing. So, I think what we try to do in this sort of menu of options is create different opportunities for different contexts. If there's not an opportunity for an internship or an apprenticeship, you can create there's some colleges have created design challenges in their classrooms that have been able to mimic some of those things. I could talk all day about the data challenges. When we were, building this college to jobs map, we ran into a lot of issues, that we weren't able to track necessarily migration. We know a lot of students stay, a lot of students from community colleges and state colleges tend to stay and work in the region, but a lot don't. We have questions around, what career does an English major go into? And then, so there are a lot of these questions out there that data will be really helpful. And the disaggregated data is so important. I've heard from folks that actually the requirement to disaggregate data gives them a little cover so that they're actually able to kind of, discuss equity in places that it's not necessarily welcome.
Yes, that was a gentle way of framing it. I sometimes have the challenge, and I think we all do in higher education, maybe particularly at places that pride themselves on the liberal arts education, about talking explicitly about preparation for the workforce and for careers. Folks are fond of talking about the life of the mind. It's great. I think we understand the importance of that. But students, and not just students from lower socioeconomic statuses, students are deeply concerned about today and the job prospects that face them and the turbulence in the workforce and the economy. The population of students we have with us now don't trust things to be stable, right? I mean, they understand the precarious nature of what we've constructed. Where in the volumes of research and data that you have, where do we start with colleagues who aren't yet thinking that the first year writing course that they're teaching is eventually about a destination for that student of launching them into a career, into a good job in the CEW, the Center in Workforce Language? Where do we start that conversation to help the data help us tell the story to our colleagues?
I mean, one big piece I think you mentioned, Heidi, is this is what students are demanding. This is what students want. All the polls show that, students are going to college to get a good job. And so if we're not, if colleges, are not delivering on that, it's also not an either or, and a lot of the skills in liberal arts are really important. David Deming, has done a study that shows that, actually studying liberal arts can lead to gains down the line because it leads to critical thinking skills, etc. So I think kind of breaking down that dichotomy as well and saying, actually, in this writing course, you're teaching a lot of skills. Let's think about how they apply. It's not an either or. These are two important dimensions, but if we are responding to student needs, we really need to take this under consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that that notion of so at CEW we often talk about sort of general versus specific skills, and one type of general skill might be the critical thinking or the soft skills that you have the opportunity to learn in a liberal arts environment, that isn't about teaching you how to code in Python, for example, right? And those are complements to each other, and so creating, I think we in the media has sort of created this artificial tension and divide that one is at the cost of the other. No, we want to have both of those because that actually is what equips people to have the most success, not only in their first job, but also gives them the set of foundational skills that is going to enable them to be resilient when our economy is changing in dynamic ways that we right now as researchers or policymakers or college administrators cannot foresee what the economy is going to be like in 30 years. And a lot of the individuals that you are training through your programs right now are still going to be working and need to be able to pivot in ways that we can't predict right now. We need to be preparing them with a set of skills that is going to enable them to make those types of transitions that are coming no matter what. And it is really the complement of those general and specific skills that's going to give them the best combination of human capital to be able to do that.
And I think people fear that their subject or, their love, their passion is going to be threatened. Whereas, I think we can look at, for example, the University of South Florida was tracking English majors. They found that a lot of them went into project management roles. So they started thinking about like, what does the English curriculum look like? And how can we both keep this, the importance of the English skills, but also integrate project management skills. So we don't need to lose some of these majors, but we can, it's a both and they're all going to be important, I think.
And so one small piece that I love is the discussion about them as being general and specific skills. I think sometimes the language of like the soft skills feels automatically like it's a second-class citizen as opposed to the technical skills in our society, and I don't think that's the case at all. I also find that the things that we look for in employees when we're hiring are often the very same skill sets that I'm looking for students to have in classrooms, right? We want folks who are clear communicators. We want folks who know how to work in teams. We want folks who are flexible. And I found myself reading both of your documents. I mean, literally looking for kind of the piece to pull out to start to share with folks to help understand that it's a continuum for our students, and we have to see it as a continuum as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the funny thing is, all employers are asking for these skills, these soft skills. The reason they're soft is because we haven't made them hard. We haven't been able necessarily to measure them, which, I think if we can figure out a way to do that, David Deming has the skills lab in which he's kind of developed these experiments to measure teamwork and measure decision making. And I think if we can better understand the importance of these skills, if we can call them out and we can foster classroom environments that encourage these skills, we can both better prepare students for the workplace, but also general society. And, you know, we know our civic health also depends on these skills. So these are very important.
What, just sort of bringing in another sort of piece of relatively recent research, which I think is germane to this conversation. One of the things that Raj Chetty and his colleagues recently showed is just how important social capital is to upward economic mobility. And so if you are an individual who's coming from a low-income background, the more connections you have with high SES peers, the greater your chances of achieving upward economic mobility are in your own life. And what, you know, the way that I read that research is that relationship is so powerful right now in many ways because of how fractured and disjointed our education and workforce systems are. And in fact, if we can create a more cohesive framework that bridges these divides and that connects students to employers, that gives them, you know, a opportunity to work while they're in college that's actually related to what they're studying, and that's going to create, you know, the first full-time job that they have coming out of their program, with hopefully some opportunities for advancement. We're going to see that, you know, the personal relationship that you may or may not have made with you know, your college roommate, and who, you know, their uncle is hopefully going to become less consequential. But that really is, you know, takes a policy response to what currently is a very, very, very siloed system. And so I think one of the challenges is that we have funded systems to be very siloed, but it's also reinforced that at an institutional level, I think we all think about, you know, well, this is my campus and this is my set of students and this is what I have control over. And as much as we can, I think collectively we need to sort of push against that framework, because really the way that we're going to change the narrative and change the story about how opportunity is created is by bridging these divides that have existed for a very, very long time, and understandably are very hard to break down and disrupt. But I think that really is where the solution lies.
Zack and Kerry, now that I have two of your contact information, we'll keep talking beyond this, but we're going to have to wrap up our session for today. We dropped a few links into the chat. We're going to share at the end of today our daily email that wraps up these sessions, but also kind of looks ahead for our closing day tomorrow. I want to thank folks who stayed with us through the full day today, because we know it's a lot for you to take in, but hopefully this provided you with ideas, with some places to go for some resources, and with a sense about the sorts of work and research that are out there that can help us help our students better, and to help them in the sort of nuanced ways, so that the work that we're doing has the maximum impact to increase social mobility and career outcomes for our students. So Zack, Kerry, thank you so much for joining us today. And for the rest of you, we hope that you get a good evening's rest before we start off again tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thanks, Heidi. And my contact information is in the chat for anyone who'd like to reach out. And I saw Zack did the same.
Yeah.
So
thanks for the opportunity.
bye.
Thank you, folks.